we belong to a group called Quilt Guys. It's a Yahoo group that was started back in 2000 by Kevin Britton from Orlando, Florida. 2008, early 2008, we started talking about how it'd be fun to do regional retreats. So myself, Hollis Turnbow, and the Woodstock Quilt Supply store was with Jim and Bob, owners, offered to host it, and myself and Hollis, we also took a bit of the lead to start organizing the participants.
One of my old art teachers, Jackson Brockett, visited me a year and a half ago during the summer and saw my quilts and said, "You got to meet these guys, Quilt Guys."
Somehow I found out about the Quilt Guy Yahoo group, and so I joined, which was an email discussion list, and it was pretty active, and they would do things like have fabric swaps where guys would send fabric through the mail and trade fabric with each other. And then on the list one day, someone mentioned, you know, what about getting together in person? I was a little bit nervous that first retreat because I had never met any of the quilters in person. I didn't know what to expect.
I think I had heard about the retreat on Bob and Jim from Woodstock Quilts. They were located in Woodstock. They called themselves the shop Quilt Stock. And I found out about it through them, and I decided I just had to go. It was an amazing weekend to spend with a dozen other men who did, thought, and practiced what I did.
In speaking with somebody in my guild, they had mentioned Paul Leger's name to me, that she knew who he was, and that perhaps I can get into contact with him. So I did a search for him on Facebook. He had told me about the group, the Quilters Guild, the All-Male Quilters Guild, and I was asked if I'd like to join, and I said, of course, definitely. And I've been a member, I guess now it's probably going on to my third year. So the first year while I was a member, I had asked Paul, hey, do you guys ever get together to go on any retreats or anything? And he says, as a matter of fact, there's one coming up. I said, put my name down because I'd really, really like to attend.
I found out online that there was a quilt group for guys, and I joined one January just as they were announcing their winter retreat.
Back quite a few years ago, I knew Hollis Turnbow. I was talking to him one day, and he told me about the Quilt Guy group online.
I happened to be in New York about 5-6 years ago, and went to the City Quilter there. I met a guy called Charles Johns, who encouraged me to join Quilt Guys.
One day I decided I'm just going to get on this internet and quilt and see if there's any men quilters and see if there's any men's group, and lo and behold, there was a guy that showed up in there and he said yes.
I've been a member of the Quilt Guy group for probably 6 years. I met Paul Leger online about that time, and was very interested in the group just from exchanging ideas. And he mentioned that they were doing a retreat out here.
As I grew up, I had aunts who lived out on the farm, grandmother, who were all very prolific quilters. And as they did in the old days, quilts were used to keep warm because there was no central heat in the farmhouse or in most houses in town either at that time. So I lived around quilting. I played under the quilt when it was hanging under from the ceiling. I was teaching for a local rec department, teaching needlework as art rather than embroidered cup towels and decorative items. So I was teaching it as art, and one day I got a call from the director who asked me if I knew anything about quilting, and I said, sure. And I'm sure without realizing it, I did this. Remember I said I played under the quilt when I was a child, watching what was happening in the needle coming through. So it was something that I just knew how to do, but I actually had never even made one at that point or taught it or needed to do it. But I was fortunate because at that time, the first major exhibit as quilts as folk art was traveling the country. In 1973, it was at one of the galleries in Washington, D.C. And I went to see it because I worked very close, and sitting out in the foyer of the rotunda of the museum were these women around a quilting frame. So I went up to them and said, I have a problem. Well, what is it? I need to start quilting, start teaching quilting, and while I know how to do it, I've never taught it. They were very helpful in helping me to develop a course outline for quilting, and I started. I was fortunate at the time because it was really a time in history before it became cool for a man to quilt.
Started New Year's Day, I think this was 2002, 2003, something like that. Bought just a wonderful little machine because I needed a diversion from other hand quilting or hand work things I was doing, needlepoint, etc.
Quilting for 25 and a half years. I started quilting while serving in the military because I'd ruined a few Air Force shirts, and being my mother is a dressmaker, I knew I had to save the buttons. In doing so, I realized that they used to do quilts using old clothing. So I started cannibalizing shirts and made my first quilt.
I started quilting back in 1976, which was the bicentennial year. I went to a couple of exhibits of American folk art and saw my first American quilts and really wanted to start collecting them, so I thought maybe I could make some.
90s, I was visiting Wave Hill, which is a park in the Bronx in New York City on the shores of the Hudson, and they have a small art gallery, and I literally just stumbled into an exhibit of art quilts, modern quilts, and I was kind of blown away by them and became very interested in quilting.
I've been doing quilting, since 1997, and I got started when a friend of mine asked me if I could fix her quilt, and it turned out the quilt was toast. There wasn't much that could be done with it, but I did find Eddie's Quilting Bee in Mountain View, California, and took beginning with Bev, and off I went.
And a client of mine walked in with this beautiful quilt that she had made, and I was so enamored by the fact that she actually made this from scratch in such detail, I pursued the quest for learning on how to make a quilt.
Started sewing because my wife wanted new drapes, and I said, oh, that must be simple to do, and she said, go ahead. And after I broke the sewing machine and I had to get it repaired, I saw some quilts at the sewing store, and I took some lessons, and that was about 10, 12 years ago.
Started quilting about 21 years ago when I found out I was having twin granddaughters. And back then I was woodworking, so I made them a cradle, and then I decided that I needed something a bit more personal.
I took up quilting about 7 or 8 years ago when I retired, just for something artistic to do, and I happened to be in a quilt shop one day, and the lady said that she was quite sure anybody could quilt, so she threw down the challenge to me.
Basically, I've quilted most of my life because how I really got into quilting was my dad was a coal miner from the state of West Virginia, and there were 7 kids in the family, and because of health reasons, it got to the place where Mother worked and made quilts basically for survival means, and I worked with Mother to help make quilts, and we sold them.
I got into quilting about 15 years ago, and it was a kind of an odd way I got into it. I just found some quilts in a store once that I just loved, and I was interested in purchasing them for my home, and the ladies in the shop said that the quilts were not for sale, but they could teach me how to make a quilt.
Come to the conclusion over the years that there's really only 2 major requirements or rules in quilt making, and that's accurate cutting and accurate piecing. Because quilts very often are pieces put together just like a jigsaw puzzle. And if the pieces don't fit, the puzzle doesn't fit. Quilting absolutely is therapeutic. When I'm stressed out, I go to the sewing machine, go to the basement and start making little quilts.
It was therapy. It was an opportunity to just do something that allowed me to use a different part of my brain to relax and to create something that I thought was fun and interesting and challenging and beautiful. And over the years, started making quilts to give as gifts, and that just really has been a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful thing to do. Just to see people's eyes when they open a present and see that it's a quilt has been very, very special.
I'm now up to approximately 150 quilts. Actually, most of them have been given to family. I've given some for raffles. But the one quilt that I think I'm most pleased with is one that I've donated to the University of Moncton, to the Acadian Museum. It's a representation of the founding families of the region.
My quilts are pretty much works of art. I make quilts to use on beds, or I should say I used to make them, but now I only make the art pieces. I'm interested in showing them in art shows and having gallery presence, that type of thing. I've won a few awards here and there. They're almost hybrids. They're, unusual as quilts for art shows, and they're unusual as art objects for quilt shows. So I get a lot of interest, but a lot of head scratches, I think, from people that are trying to put them in a pigeonhole.
Very proud and kind of excited to make quilts for both of my sons. I have two sons, Zachary and Noah. I've probably just been excited about seeing my progression over the years, and the most recent quilt that I've really been excited about is a pattern called New York Beauty, which is a very intricate quilt with lots of very sharp points, and the one I made is using purple and gold fabric, and it's the first quilt that I've finished and really looked at and thought like, wow, I can't believe I made that quilt.
I'm a big log cabin aficionado. I make a lot of log cabin style quilts. I make a lot of quilts in general. I make a lot of teaching samples. One of the other things I do is I make baby quilts for all the newborns in the office. So I make probably anywhere from 4 to 6 baby quilts a year. I've done about 30 of those thus far.
Each one of my family members has a quilt for me that if anything should ever happen to me, they have something besides my my outgoing personality to remember me by. A lot of times I make quilts for the Canadian Breast Cancer Association, my guild that I'm a member of. We do charity quilts. We do a charity quilt every year.
I had done a Baltimore Album monochromatic quilt, which was blue and white, and it won Viewer's Choice at our local quilt show. It was advertised in the Newport News paper. I started getting really interested after that and started doing bed quilts for family members. And I have won some ribbons for some of the quilts I've had in different shows. I am very involved in the Quilts of Valor program. As a matter of fact, in the last year, I've quilted over 38 quilts for the Quilts of Valor Foundation for people who have sent me quilts, and something like 36 quilts that were made by guild members of the Champlain Valley Quilt Guild in Vermont. I continue to be very involved in that, and I am now working with the state coordinator for Quilts of Valor, who was actually here today, and I delivered a quilt to her.
The biggest portion of my quilts I donate to charity. I have a few grandchildren that I've made quilts for grandchildren for Christmases and birthday gifts, and there's been a few quilts that I have sold for where people have seen my quilts that they've asked for specific projects, and I have made quilts for those type of things, but I'd say 75% I donate to charity.
Brought about 3 simple projects that will make a quilted piece about 45 by 60, which is a good left size. The kind of thing that I will give to a charitable organization, or the Quilts of Valor Project. It's those kind of things that you can sit down and accomplish a lot of production in a short period of time. Have something to take home and be proud of, and then perhaps finish up.
I'm working on a paper-pieced quilt that will be, I think, a very modern quilt. It's a very simple star design and very plain fabrics, solid fabrics, with one punch of color thrown in. I started it this weekend. It will not get done this weekend. It will not get done next weekend. It'll take a while.
What am I working on? As most of us, we have several projects on the go. I started one when I got here, realized I didn't cut my fabric right, so I went on to project number 2, which last night I discovered that I'd sewn 190 pieces wrongly, so I had to unsew them all. So it's a typical retreat weekend where you sew, and seam rip a bit.
My quilts are based on images from art history. Usually I take a portrait of a favorite artist and make a quilt of their face. This year I'm working on one of my great art heroes, El Greco.
One that I'm working on is another New York Beauty again, which is a pattern that's, the pattern is lots of sharp, very sharp points. And I'm using black and white fabrics with a few colors mixed in as well. That's something I've been working on for a while now, so that's one thing I worked on. The other thing I've worked on this weekend is a white and green quilt with small squares. That's kind of a modern looking quilt, and I finished sewing that together today.
Project was a baby quilt. It's a Jacob's ladder, and that took hardly any time to put together. It's all finished at this point. The second project was a teaching Bargello quilt. It's a bed runner, so it's long and skinny, and it's a perfect quilt for a teaching sample because it doesn't take a lot of time or material to put it together. And the final quilt that I'm working on now is a red and white pineapple. I've got it started with a series of red and white quilts, and this is the third red and white quilt in the series. And pineapple is a variation on a log cabin, so it keeps in my trend of doing lots of log cabin quilts.
I prepared 5 different projects. One which is a paper piecing project, which is probably about the second time I'm doing one, and it's all done by 18-inch hexagon, done with very bright rainbow colors. Currently, at the present moment, I'm working on a table runner, and it's quite interesting because it's done in a very spiral fashion. It's the first time that I'm doing something like that. I have a few other projects I want to be working on, hopefully by the end of the weekend, but I have a feeling I'll only get 2 of my projects that I have with me done.
So this weekend I'm working on a project for my daughter. She wants a quilt of the month for her bed. So I'm a bit late doing Valentine's Day, but I have a bunch of Valentine fabric, reds and pinks. And I'm just doing a brick wall.
I have a tote that I put all my UFOs, unfinished objects in, and I turned around and I've actually gotten something like 6 quilt tops done just in the last 3 days because I've had all these blocks laying around, some of them for 20 years. And I just decided that I was going to get them out and give them away as community quilts to our guild.
In a quilt on a commission, which I probably won't finish, but at least I've got started on it, and any difficulties I have, I've ironed out with the fellow quilters here.
Do quilts for terminally ill children, and I donate them to a charity organization. And one that I've done so far is, like I said, was the Dolphins, and I've done another one that it's for motorcycles, and I have a tendency to do a lot of like Mickey and Minnie, the Disney characters, and like NASCAR, and a lot of sports team, football, basketball, because there are a lot of terminally ill little boys too. I donate to a charity where there's a lot of quilts that are donated for girls, and they're very excited that I do quilts for the kids, for the little boys. So they said, I guess for a while the little boys had to pick girl quilts, but now they're excited to have a man quilter to where they get little boy stuff. So
I'm making just a set of small 6-inch blocks that I'm going to use as a border on a quilt, but I didn't bring the whole quilt out here. And I have a hand project also. I do a lot of Japanese quilting, and I do a Japanese decorative stitching called sashiko, which is very simple and doesn't take a lot of supplies, travels well. So I have a large project here that I'm working on, which is a wall hanging. It'll probably take me a couple of weeks worth of stitching on and off to do this project. So I've just started it this weekend. I probably won't actually finish any of my projects this weekend. They're just ongoing collections of things I work on.
To these events that you're seeing this tape of, because it allows a group to get together and just relax in quilting. The fact that it's only men is of not any major significance, but it does give us a chance to come out and be part of a very companionable weekend to quilt together, share information, see what other people are doing. There are a lot of men out there doing it now, and I'm certainly glad to be part of that and have been part of this whole movement called quilt making.
It's a very special treat to be able to have 3 days uninterrupted with friends to just share stories and create. And over the years, we really have become friends. We are able to talk about what's going on in our lives, but also, you know, what we plan to do and what our dreams are, what our quilting goals are. And that, as much as anything, it makes this all worthwhile, because we just feed off each other and encourage each other and share. And that's been a really great benefit of coming to these retreats.
Our weekends we sit here, we sew all weekend, we chat, we laugh, but something that's also very much important for us here is we must sit together for have our meals. We don't want to have different meals at different times, so we must sit together. So on 2 nights during the retreat, we all sit around 2 small tables and we play right, left, center. We play for fat quarters, and it's a winner-take-all game. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of great fat quarters, and there are some really ugly ones in there. Another part that it's a must for our retreats is shopping. As any good quilter, we enjoy our fabric stores, and luckily right next door here to the Fullerton Inn, there's the Country Treasure Quilt Shop, which has got 5,000–6,000 bolts of fabric. So we do a lot of, it's not an event to go there, but it's an experience for us to go there and enjoy.
I just sort of fell in love with the Vermont landscape, the colors, the shadows, the snow that's still on the mountains. So this is really what grabbed me.
I think the thing that I think about the most in terms of the retreats is really the friendships that I've developed over the years with people who come from literally all over the country and from Canada. I look forward to seeing those people twice a year.
Found myself in a room with family. I was so welcomed by everybody. It was just very overwhelming. And one of the things I love about getting together with other men who quilt, there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no judgmental.
I've been joining them now for 5 or 6 years and made some great friendships and just had a wonderful time.
We laugh a lot. We have very nice meals together. We enjoy each other's company, and we share our talents with one another. There isn't a person here that does not share something that they have learned over the years. And I know that I have learned a couple things out of this group that have made like my bindings. Hollis some years ago showed us how to do the corners on bindings, and ever since then my bindings on my quilts are almost perfect on the corners. And just that help has made my striving to do better for my quilts. And I learned that from this organization, from this group of guys.
It's very difficult. It's quite difficult, I should say, in England for quilt guys like myself, although there's I joined various quilt classes, but there's very few men that actually quilt. And so it's really quite nice to come and be in this group.
It has been very rewarding because there's such a unique talent among the guys, and every time I've come, I have learned tremendously the new techniques and the new procedures out and the new patterns and just the new ways to do quilts, and so it's very rewarding.
I've learned a lot from the members. They're all very talented, and some are internationally recognized artists who are award-winning quilters. So I feel very privileged to be part of this group.
I think it's kind of unusual for men to do quilting. Actually, historically, it is unusual. And I think in our day and age, let's face it, it's 2015, and we can do it if we want to. And I think in many cases, you need some buddies to kind of support you and encourage you. And this is where our group falls into place.
More men are sort of coming out of the quilting closet, as it were. They're starting to find that there's more of us.
We met at a quilt store in Woodstock, New York. That's unfortunately now closed. We met at a university once. We rented their hall and stayed in their dorms. We had 6 retreats at a bed and breakfast in New Lebanon, New York. And as of last September, we moved here to Chester, Vermont at the Fullerton Inn to try a new place. And one great thing about this location is we sew in one building, we eat in the same building, and we sleep in the same buildings. We're not a closed group. We are allowing more people to join us, but it is closed to the point that it's guys only. We did not want to make this a co-ed thing. We wanted it to be just guys. Should there be some men quilting out there that would like to join us or more information about our retreats, as I mentioned earlier, there's a Yahoo Quilt Guy group that you could find it, and through there you can send me a message. Or if you look up again on Facebook where there's Man Quilter group or the Men That Quilt group, again through those 2 web pages, or rather Facebook pages, you'll be able to find me. And my name's Paul Leger. If you can't find me or if you can't remember, just put in a general comment. How do I find out more information about the retreats in the Northeast? So I'm hoping to hear from you because we're always looking for new quilters and new ideas. What makes these little quilt retreats fun, especially when we move, is arriving to the new location. I'm not really the first one to arrive, so I'll go to a local quilt shop and to go introduce myself to let them know we've arrived and it's going to be starting anytime. Although they know we're coming, I walk into the quilt store and they're okay with a male quilter, but it's like, who is this guy? We've never seen him before. They know I'm not from the region. And so it's a bit of a blank stare and a bit of questioning, and as soon as they realize that who I am, it's like, oh my God, how are you? It's a lot of fun. Even the hugs and kisses are starting right away, not knowing exactly who I am and barely knowing me. So it's something I always enjoy, is going to a new location, or if there's a new staff member in these quilt stops that you get to meet, because they love seeing us. They love our interaction.